All right, so let's talk about the decorator pattern. As I mentioned earlier, it's very similar to the strategy design pattern. They both deal with the fact of dealing with very small solutions, or very targeted or very self-contained reusable solutions, and they try not to depend on any other strategy. Yes, they're trying to be self-contained, but then you could create ever more complex decorators that delegate their behaviors in terms of much more simpler implementations. Yes, and combine them in groups of 2s, 3s, 4s. Right, and you can create these long chains of decorators that each decorator adds just slightly more complex behavior than its predecessor. Okay, and a little bit different from the strategy pattern is that the strategy pattern could actually, a strategy might be able to compute something on its own, right, without the need of delegating to anyone else. Yes, as opposed to here. It's strictly composition and delegation, right? Now, the example that's most used to explain what the decorator pattern, the way it works, is is using the swing library, right? We see all these components that are graphical components that somewhat build on each other, right? Where they add just an additional level of behavior, right? But always written in terms of something that is much simpler than themselves, right? So, for instance, the use of the Jpanel, this very simple representation of some rectangular piece of screen, a piece of canvas that you can add anything you want in it, right? But it's very generic. It doesn't do much on its own, right? But at least it's some raw functionality that you can perhaps build something on top of that, right? So the Jpanel being the raw base implementation that just displays an empty rectangular area on the screen. So here's a very generic Jpanel 1, 2, 3, and the idea is that more sophisticated components would build on this low-level implementation, right, and would add additional features, additional behaviors in terms of these smaller, more simpler components. So, for instance, there's quite a few of these. I don't know if you have the chance to explore the swing set of libraries. You have the J-scroll panel, the split panel, the grid panel. I mean, just tons of these components, right? And if you look at their implementation internally, they're all written in such a way that they use delegation, right? They use composition, so that they're written in terms of these more simpler components, right? So they're all, for instance, the split panel is just 2 panels split together, right? And then you have 2 panels on left and right, or top bottom, where you can put components in each one, right? But the only behavior that it adds is that it's split in half, right? Either horizontal or vertically, right? And then you have this thumb that you can drag left and right, right, to have this split. The grid panel allows you to have just multiple panels, right, where individually you can add any number of components inside of those panels, right? So it keeps track of an array, right, of multiple panels. Again, each one independently implemented internally. The scroll panel, right, adds just scrolling on the panel, so it allows you to just move the panel left and right, so you can see more content. So each one adds some additional behavior. So, for instance, the scroll panel is basically this J panel in the middle, and then just adds these decorators, right, where these scroll bars are basically decorating. That's where the name decorator comes from. Is that you have this original panel, and I'm just adding these additional bits and pieces around it, decorating it, but the main functionality is the same, right? You have content in the center, right? I'm just allowing you to move it up and down, horizontally, vertically, so I can see more content. Something that doesn't fit, I can add these scroll bars. Or I can now have perhaps a split panel where I can have a scroll bar panel inside of another Jpanel in between, right? Where the additional behavior here is that I can have two of these side by side, right? Each one can be scrolled independently, and each one has internally another panel inside. The only additional behavior is that, excuse me, I can change the size of these on either side by giving you a thumb in the middle, right? That I can drag left or I can drag right, changing the size of the panels on either side, right? But my implementation goes that far. Everything else, right, is written in terms of the scroll panels, and the scroll panels are written in terms of the panels, Jpanels underneath, right? So and internally they're implemented using delegation. They're not implemented using inheritance, right? Each one has an instance of each other, as opposed to inheriting from one another. Okay. So the terminology that we use is that ever increasing behaviors are decorating the more raw or the more native behaviors, right? You decorate and add additional decorators surrounding the outer decorator decorates the inner elements, right? Adding borders, adding scroll bars, adding splitters or whatnot, right? So they all do the same thing, right? They provide some additional incremental functionality, right? And then everything else is delegated to the components that are implemented internally, that it uses internally as references to other other classes, other objects. Okay. So each increasingly more sophisticated class just it's responsible for a small fragment of the functionality. Everything else is delegated, right, through composition, through other objects that are responsible for their additional functionality.